Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We are in 1 Timothy chapter 5. We are continuing in verse 13 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we saw last lesson in verse 13, the first part, it says, and withal, they, meaning the women who get married again and decide that they are going to serve their husbands and minister to them, they leave off the ministry of the church and they get married again. And so now they marry this man, and now they go home and they start to clean the house and things, and now they're not fully dedicated to the church. So because of that, the possibility of these 5 things happening to this woman take place, and that is that, and withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle but tattlers. And those were the 3 that we looked at last lesson, and we're going to look at the other 2 this lesson. And we said that these 5 things are in progression. First, they're idle. They get married again, and now, again, they're not fully devoted to the church. Now they have a husband to take care of. They take care of the house, and they take care of the home. But again, and it's not every woman who remarries has these problems, but the possibility of these things happening is there, that maybe they are idle. They don't have as much to do. And because of idleness, they begin to wander from house to house, their friends' houses, and they begin to wander and to talk, and wandering from house to house, and tattlers also. They begin to speak things they shouldn't. And then now from tattlers it goes to this lesson, but also busybodies. Now, busybodies is the 4th one, and the Greek word here is periergos. Periergos, and peri again means around, and ergos means to work. So the Greek word here is used, this Greek word is only used in one other place in the Bible, and it's in Acts chapter 19 and verse 19. And it says here, many of them also which used curious arts. Curious arts, that's where the Greek word periergos is. It says, and many of them also which used curious arts brought their books together and burned them before all men. And they counted the price of them and found it 50,000 pieces of silver. So that was a lot of money back then. I mean, even today in our world, if I had 50,000 pieces of silver, I don't care what size they are, it's worth some money. So, in context, in Acts 19:19, it means that there were many people in Ephesus who were dabbling around in knowledge and information that they shouldn't have been. It says they brought their books together. Their books of curious arts, of periergos, and they begin to occupy their life in some kind of new knowledge. Now, when we see that English phrase, curious arts, it tends to make us think that these Ephesians were getting into occult and witchcraft and other forms of spiritual things. And that's possible. It's possible that these books that they brought and they burned, that many of these books were part of the occult. and spiritual enlightenment and things. That's true. But it also can refer to knowledge and information that does not lead a person to the knowledge of God and to salvation. So it don't think that, these curious art books were only occultic books. No, it can be any other kind of book, any other kind of information that leads a person away from God and away from salvation, away from God's thoughts. These people in Ephesus knew that these books, again, the topic of those books, it's not suggested, but there's a lot of books that were brought. But the people of Ephesus knew that these books were not leading them into a proper view of the spirit world, or of creation, or of Jesus Christ and of salvation. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were just occultic books. It could be books on other subjects, evolution or whatever, science or something. Could be other books, but they realized that these books were not leading them in the right direction. They were not leading them into God's thoughts about life, about creation, about God. What's God's thoughts about the spirit world, right? So they brought these books and they burned them. And so busybodies here it was that they were busy. These people of Ephesus were busy collecting information that was outside of God's information. Now, but in the context of 1 Timothy 5 verse 13, it refers to widows who go from house to house, prying into the affairs of other people that they shouldn't. They search for knowledge and for information that is really none of their business. Like the people of Ephesus, they were searching for knowledge. They were searching for information that really God did not want them getting involved in. And here these women are going from house to house. They're idle. They have nothing to do today, so they're going to go wander from house to house, friends' houses or people they know, and they're going to start getting information, busybody. They're going to start collecting information that's none of their business. And as Christians, we need to check ourselves when we talk with other people if this information is really important information or if it's not. All right? Do I really need to know this, or is this just useless information? Why do I need to know what happens with this person's son's wife, or this person's cousin? Who cares? What benefit is that? Talking about, other people's lives, just being a busybody. So this is the problem. They're idle. They wander from house to house. They begin to be tattlers, and then after that, busybodies, meaning collecting information about people's lives that really is none of our business. And then the last one, it says, speaking things which they ought not. And here are these women who get married and they're idle, and they start to speak the secrets and confidentialities that they heard from other people. And why not? Why not? They are bored and they have nothing to do. Their life is empty, so they pry into other people's businesses and they pry into other people's lives and they spread it around town. And this results in heartache and anger and division in the church and a multitude of other sins. And that's why it's so dangerous. This is why Paul warns Timothy to not allow, not to take in these young women into the registry of having them supported by the church. If they're younger, let them marry and get involved. And then in a sense, Paul is warning Timothy about these young women, that even though they get married, there's a tendency for them to want to get idle and they get busy in other people's lives, and it can cause division in the church, spreading around rumors of not rumors, but information that they collect from this house and they take it here, and they talk about other people's lives, and people get offended and hurt, and then it affects the church, brings division in the church, and it can be used by Satan and his kingdom to divide the church. Now, these 5 things that were talked about can happen when a person does not keep themselves active in the things of God. And this is why it's important for us to be active in the things of God, to be going to church, be going to Bible study, to be involved in an outreach ministry somewhere, to be involved in prayer meeting. It's important when we start to slack off. When again, it begins in verse 13, begins with what? And wherewithal they learn to be idle. They learn to be idle. And we said last lesson that idleness begins right here in the mind. Begins in the mind. And for a Christian to be idle means they become spiritually idle to the things of God. They stop doing the things of God. They don't want to go to church so much. They don't want to go to the Bible study anymore. They don't want to be involved in outreach or the things of God anymore. They just want to live their own life. They want to be idle. And idleness begins here in the mind. And idleness, again, begins to create these other things. And they speak things which they ought not. And it starts, and this is, again, Satan's kingdom can use this idleness for his purpose against the church. All right? We'll begin verse 14 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.